The brain remembers pictures, not words. How the brain learns English. Have you ever wondered why you keep forgetting? Why you study something today and it disappears tomorrow as if it never existed? Why you pour hours into reading a chapter, but the moment you close the book, your mind goes blank? Why you memorize English vocabulary again and again, but when you need to speak, every word vanishes? And why some people can glance at something once and remember it for years, while you study until you're exhausted and still feel stuck? Be honest. How many times have you gotten angry at yourself because your memory feels weak? How many nights have you spent studying, only to wake up the next morning and realize nothing stayed in your head? How many times have you asked yourself, what's wrong with me? Am I slow? Am I just not smart enough? But here's the truth. One of the most important truths you will ever learn about your mind. There is nothing wrong with your memory. You are not slow. You are not less intelligent. Your brain is not broken. You've simply been using it the wrong way. You've been trying to force your brain to remember words, even though your brain was never built to remember words. From the very beginning of human evolution, long before writing even existed, your brain was designed to survive by remembering images, faces, colors, landscapes, danger, movement. For millions of years, humans remembered the world through sight. But writing? Words? Letters on a page? They've only been around for a few thousand years, far too short a time for your brain to adapt. And yet every day, you try to memorize everything through words. Pages of words. Lists of words. Notes made of words. You force words into a brain that was designed for images. And then you blame yourself when you forget. But you forget not because you're slow. You forget because you're fighting against the natural wiring of your own brain. Your brain is not a machine for remembering text. Your brain is a machine for remembering pictures. Think about your own life. You can remember someone's face after seeing it for 5 seconds, but you can't remember their name. You can remember a movie scene from 10 years ago, but not the paragraph you read 10 minutes ago. You instantly recognize the Apple logo, the Nike logo, the McDonald's logo, after seeing it once. But you can't remember 3 lines from your meeting yesterday. You remember the final scene from Titanic in vivid detail, but you can't recall 5 bullet points from the chapter you studied last night. Does that seem strange to you? It shouldn't. That is exactly how the human brain was designed. And here's the part that might shock you. If you are trying to memorize everything through words, you are basically fighting against one of the most powerful biological machines nature has ever created. Your own mind. And you will lose that battle every single time. Not because you're not capable, but because you're using the wrong method. Imagine trying to ride a bicycle the way you drive a car. No matter how hard you try, no matter how determined you are, you will fail, not because you're incapable, but because you're using the wrong approach. Memory works the same way. When you study using only words, your brain shuts down. But when you transform words into images, funny, exaggerated, emotional, unusual images, your brain lights up like a Christmas tree. When you force yourself to read a page of dry text, your brain sees nothing but symbols. But when you turn ideas into pictures, your brain immediately pays attention. When you try to memorize a to-do list, your brain fights it. But when you turn that list into a visual story, your brain remembers it instantly. This is why you keep forgetting. And this is why today, in this one moment, everything about the way you learn and remember is about to change. Because now you know the truth. You don't have a bad memory. You've just been using it incorrectly. Now ask yourself, do you want to remember faster? Do you want to study less but remember more? Do you want a brain that feels sharp, powerful, reliable? Do you want to break out of the endless cycle of study, forget, study again, forget again? If you're nodding right now, keep listening, because you are about to discover one of the most powerful secrets about human memory. A secret that, once you understand it, will make you look back and think, why didn't anyone teach me this sooner? Take a deep breath. Open your mind, because what you're about to learn will change the way you study, the way you remember, and the way you use your brain. Forever. Chapter 1. Why the human brain was designed to remember images. If you want to understand why images are the key to unstoppable memory, you must begin with one foundational question. What was the human brain originally created to do? And here is the truth most people never realize. The brain was not designed to read books or memorize written symbols. For millions of years, long before writing even existed, survival depended on your ancestors' ability to recognize faces, shapes, colors, movement, danger, food sources, emotional expressions, and changes in the environment. Your brain evolved to process the visual world with extraordinary speed and precision. Because of this, the visual system occupies a massive portion of the cortex and connects directly to structures responsible for memory formation, the hippocampus, and emotional tagging, the amygdala. Whenever information enters your mind through images, especially vivid, unusual, emotional, or exaggerated images, it activates multiple regions simultaneously. The visual cortex interprets shape and color, the hippocampus begins storing the memory, and the amygdala attaches emotional weight that makes the memory stick. This is not speculation. It is simply how the brain works, and you experience the evidence every single day. You can remember a face you saw for 2 seconds, yet forget a paragraph you read 5 minutes ago. You can visualize a childhood room decades later, yet forget the instructions someone told you this morning. You recall strong movie scenes in perfect detail, but struggle to remember plain text from a chapter you studied last night. Why? Because written language is a very recent invention, only about 5,000 years old. From an evolutionary perspective, that's nothing. The brain hasn't had enough time to adapt so deeply to written symbols. But images, they have guided human survival for millions of years. This evolutionary history is why the pictorial superiority effect exists, a scientifically documented phenomenon showing that people consistently remember images far better than words. In controlled studies, participants remembered up to 90% of images after 72 hours, but only about 10% of the verbal or written information. The explanation is simple. Words must be decoded into meaning, but images deliver meaning instantly. Words are abstract. Images are concrete. Words activate a narrow pathway. Images activate multiple circuits in parallel. And when emotional content is added, something funny, shocking, cute, dramatic, memory storage becomes even stronger because the amygdala signals the brain. This is important. Save it. When you try to memorize text alone, you are fighting the natural wiring of your mind. When you turn text into images, you are working with your brain instead of against it. So how do you apply this? The first mindset shift is this: stop memorizing words. Start building images. Every time you encounter a new term, concept, or piece of information, pause for a few seconds and ask, what image could represent this idea? Choose something exaggerated, weird, emotional, or animated. Your brain notices unusual things far more than ordinary ones because novelty is biologically tied to survival. For example, instead of memorizing the word abandon by repeating its definition, imagine a giant ship sailing away while leaving a crying suitcase behind on the dock. Or for meticulous, imagine a tiny artisan counting grains of sand with a magnifying glass while sweating nervously. The more sensory detail, color, motion, emotion, the stronger the memory trace. You can apply the same principle when studying textbooks. After each paragraph, pause and create a single vivid image that represents the main idea. Hold that image for 3 to 5 seconds. Speak the summary out loud while visualizing it. This simple habit drastically increases retention. For names, the same rule applies. Attach images to sounds. Lily becomes a dancing lily flower. David becomes David Beckham autographing your shirt. For concepts, build symbolic images. For processes, imagine them unfolding as a visual sequence. For anything abstract, turn it into something tangible before trying to memorize it. Add emotion anytime possible. The amygdala acts like glue for memories, so if the image is emotionally charged, the memory lasts longer, whether the emotion is humor, fear, surprise, or even a sense of beauty. Add movement too. Motion captures the brain's attention because movement historically signaled opportunity or danger. A moving image is remembered far more easily than a static one. And finally, combine visualization with spaced repetition. Images create strong initial encoding, but spaced repetition strengthens long-term storage. The powerful combination of visual encoding plus spaced review makes memory not only stronger but effortless. For language learning, avoid translating into your native language. Translation forces you to memorize words through text again. Instead, attach foreign words directly to images. Bizarre becomes a camel in a sparkling disco outfit. Reluctant becomes someone glued to a chair refusing to stand up. With practice, this visual approach becomes automatic. It becomes the way you process and remember everything. The ultimate goal is not to occasionally use pictures, but to become the kind of thinker who instinctively visualizes information. Because once you unlock this natural mode of thinking, your memory improves across the board. Faster learning, deeper understanding, stronger recall, better creativity, and more confidence in your own mind. When you combine visual encoding, emotional tagging, movement, storytelling, and strategic review, you activate the full biological power of your brain. This chapter's message is simple. Your brain remembers images because that is how it evolved. and you can take control of this mechanism starting today. Every time you encounter information, you have a choice. Memorize the hard way through text, or the natural way through imagery. Choose images, and your memory will transform in ways you never thought possible. Chapter 2. Practical Application. Turning Words into Images. Step-by-step methods and real examples. Now that you understand why the brain is built to remember images, the next step is learning exactly how to apply that knowledge. This chapter gives you the full practical system. Step-by-step instructions, formulas, examples, and daily exercises, so you can turn any kind of information into memorable imagery. First, recognize that not all information is the same. There are 4 major categories you'll encounter. A. Short items like vocabulary or terms. B. Names and places. C. Lists and sequences. And D. Abstract or conceptual ideas. Each requires a slightly different visual strategy. For category A, vocabulary and short terms, use the formula WXI plus E plus M, word X image plus emotion plus movement. For example, for the word meticulous, imagine a miniature craftsman counting grains of sand through a magnifying glass, panicking as he misses one grain. The detail, emotion, and action make the scene unforgettable. Practice by choosing 10 new words a day. For each, spend 30 seconds creating a visual. Repeat it aloud, and review it using spaced repetition apps like Anki. For category B, names and places, the link name technique works best. Associate the sound of the name with a strong image and attach it to the person's physical feature or context. For Lily, imagine a lily flower dancing ballet. For David, imagine David Beckham kicking a ball that lands in your coffee. When you meet someone, mentally link their name with the image within 5 seconds. Repeat their name 3 times while visualizing the scene. This dramatically increases recall. For category C, lists and sequences, use the story method or the memory palace. The story method turns each list item into a memorable scene and connects them into a bizarre narrative. For example, eggs, milk, tomatoes, flour, soap becomes a chicken wearing sunglasses jumping on a milk carton, cracking eggs that roll into tomatoes, while flour rains down like snow on a bar of soap sliding across the floor. The more absurd, the more unforgettable. The memory palace goes further. Choose a familiar place, your home, your office, and assign each item to a specific location. To recall the list, mentally walk through the palace and retrieve the images. This works exceptionally well for longer lists, presentations, or study outlines. For category D, abstract ideas, convert abstract concepts into symbols. For supply and demand, imagine a giant seesaw with a mountain of goods on one side and a crowd of desperate buyers on the other. From there, build a visual story that explains how the concept works. Abstract ideas become concrete through symbolic imagery. To strengthen visuals further, use multisensory encoding. Add sounds, textures, temperatures, or smells to your imagery. The more senses involved, the stronger the memory trace. For example, Skid might include the screech of tires. Espresso might include the smell of roasted beans. Arctic might include icy wind on your skin. Next, use chunking and contrast. Group related items into categories and differentiate them using distinct characters, colors, or environments. For example, divide 20 vocabulary words into 4 groups of 5, each represented by a unique mascot or color theme. This stops mental overload and keeps your mind organized. Immediate rehearsal is essential. After creating a visual image, recall it within 10-30 seconds. Memory is extremely fragile at the beginning. Early reinforcement stabilizes the neural pattern. Now let's outline a 21-day training program to make this method automatic and instinctive. Days 1 to 3. Create images for 10 vocabulary words per day. Review after 1 hour and again after 24 hours. Days 4 to 7. Practice the link name method with 5 new names daily. Days 8 to 14. Practice story method for lists and build 2 memory palaces for longer sets of information. Days 15-21. Combine all techniques. Increase vocabulary to 20 words a day. Use Anki with image-based flashcards, and track your recall performance. For deeper application, let's walk through a complete example. Suppose you must learn 20 English words for a test. Instead of writing and rewriting definitions, spend 30-60 minutes crafting 20 strong visuals. Place 10 in your bedroom memory palace. Bed, dresser, mirror, closet, lamp, and 10 in the kitchen palace. The next morning, take a mental walk through both rooms and retrieve each image. Adjust visuals if any image feels weak. Use spaced repetition to lock everything into long-term memory. Common obstacles. I can't visualize clearly. Solution. Start with simple shapes, colors, and actions. Detail comes with practice. Creating images takes too long. The time invested saves far more time later, because once the image is created, memorization becomes instant. How do I visualize complex theories? Break them into components. Assign each component an image, then link them using a story. I still forget sometimes. Check your spacing schedule. Likely you're not reviewing at the optimal intervals. To make this system a lifelong habit, build a 5-minute per hour practice rule. Whenever you encounter new information, instantly convert it into an image. Before bed, spend 5 to 10 minutes reviewing your memory palace. Each morning, quickly scan the images you created the previous day. When you combine visual thinking, emotional amplification, motion, storytelling, and spaced repetition, you unlock the full architecture of human memory. You become faster, sharper, more focused, more confident. Most importantly, you stop fighting your brain and start working with it. Begin today. Choose 10 words, 5 names, 1 list, and 1 concept. Apply the methods in this chapter. After 7 days, you will be stunned by how much more your mind is capable of. Chapter 3. The Pictorial Superiority Effect. Continuous paragraph. No breaks. One of the most powerful and consistently proven principles in cognitive psychology is something known as the pictorial superiority effect. a phenomenon recognized by researchers at Harvard, MIT, and cognitive laboratories around the world, demonstrating that when information is presented visually rather than verbally, humans remember it dramatically better. This is not a small effect. It is one of the strongest memory findings ever documented, and understanding it can transform the way you learn, study, and store information. The principle is simple. Pictures are more memorable than words. But behind this simplicity lies a deep biological truth about how the human brain is structured. Multiple studies, including classic experiments by Paivio, Nelson, Standing, and later validated through neuroimaging at institutions like MIT's Department of Brain and Cognitive Sciences, show that images go through dual encoding, meaning they are stored both as a visual memory and as a semantic concept. While words, unless translated into an image, remain processed only at a semantic level. This dual encoding makes images far more resilient, accessible, and long-lasting. To illustrate, when people see a picture, even briefly, the brain registers shape, color, spatial orientation, emotional significance, and contextual associations, all at once, in a fraction of a second. But when people read a word or a sentence, the brain must decode letters, interpret meaning, and then construct a mental representation. The difference is massive. Images enter the brain fully formed. Words require cognitive effort to interpret. This explains why you can recognize the Apple logo after seeing it one time 10 years ago, but you cannot remember a paragraph you read 10 minutes ago. The logo entered your brain as a complete visual object, while the paragraph entered as text that needed to be mentally rebuilt, processed, and held temporarily in fragile working memory. Research shows that within 72 hours, humans remember up to 90% of visual information, but as little as 10% of verbal information. This gap becomes even bigger when information is emotional, humorous, bizarre, or vivid, because such images activate the amygdala, hippocampus, and sensory cortex simultaneously. You might not remember the exact wording of a story someone told you, but you remember the vivid picture they described. You may forget the details of a lecture, but you remember the diagram on the slide. You forget the instructions your teacher explained verbally, but recall the image in the textbook. The pictorial superiority effect influences every part of your life, even when you don't realize it. Think about advertisements. Companies invest billions in logos, imagery, and visual branding because they know images bypass conscious resistance and go straight into long-term memory. Think about movies. You remember scenes, not dialogues. Think about your childhood. You remember places, faces, colors, events, not the exact words people used. The brain evolved for images, not for text. Written language is only a few thousand years old, far too recent to rewire millions of years of visual dominance. Our ancestors remembered how a predator looked, the shape of a fruit, the trail through the forest, the face of a tribe member. These skills were essential for survival. No one needed to memorize essays or vocabulary lists. That's why when you try to learn English, study for an exam, memorize definitions, or cram information through text alone, you are using the least effective method available. You are trying to make your brain store information in its weakest format, words without imagery. And that is exactly why you forget. But the beauty of the pictorial superiority effect is that once you understand it, you can flip the script. You can turn the brain's strongest mechanism into your greatest advantage. You can make learning easier, faster, and more enjoyable simply by changing the way information enters your mind. Let's look at how it works from a neurological perspective. When you see an image, the visual cortex instantly processes edges, colors, textures, orientation, and movement. These features spread into higher-order visual areas that categorize the image. This is a face. This is an animal. This is a place. At the same time, the hippocampus begins linking it to prior knowledge, where you've seen similar shapes, what emotions are associated with them, how they relate to your memories. The amygdala evaluates whether the image has emotional relevance. Is it surprising, funny, scary, touching, strange? Emotional relevance increases neurochemical activity, norepinephrine, dopamine, strengthening synaptic consolidation. Meanwhile, the prefrontal cortex assesses meaning and relevance, giving the image conceptual depth. This network-level activation makes images neurologically heavy. They leave stronger traces than text. Words, on the other hand, travel through the brain's language centers, Broca's and Wernicke's areas, but unless turned into mental images, they remain abstract and weakly connected. They evaporate quickly, just like smoke. The brain does not naturally cling to words. It clings to meaning it can see. This is why children learn language through pictures before reading text. This is why you remember memes better than essays. This is why your brain recalls faces long after forgetting names. And this is why students who draw diagrams, sketch ideas, or visualize information score significantly higher on exams. Now let's connect this to your personal goals. If you are learning English vocabulary and you only read the word and its translation, you're using the hardest method possible. Your brain sees just text. There is nothing memorable about it. But if you convert that same word into a vivid mental image, retention skyrockets. For example, for the word collapse, imagine a giant tower of pancakes falling on top of a sleeping cat. For optimistic, imagine a smiling sun wearing sunglasses dancing on your desk. For hesitate, picture someone frozen mid-step because a banana peel is staring back at them. This may sound childish, but it's not. It is neuroscience. The stranger the image, the stronger the memory. When you study for exams, and all you do is read paragraph after paragraph, your brain is drowning in abstract text with no hooks to hold on to. But if you convert each concept into a diagram, a symbol, or a visual metaphor, retrieval becomes instant. For example, if you're studying biology, represent the cell as a bustling city with organelles as workers. If you're studying history, turn each event into a symbolic picture. If you're studying business, represent frameworks as visual shapes. When you take notes, don't only write sentences, draw connections, arrows, shapes, icons. Your brain understands pictures faster than it reads words. In fact, it processes images 60,000 times faster. That number is not exaggerated. It reflects how quickly the visual system transmits signals through parallel processing pathways. Think of your brain as having two highways, one wide, fast, and well-built, the visual system, and one narrow, slow, and congested, the verbal system. You've been trying to memorize by driving on the narrow road when the superhighway is right next to it. Every time you read a page without visualizing it, you force your mind to crawl through traffic. But if you turn the information into visuals, you are suddenly traveling at high speed, with minimal effort. The pictorial superior effect also explains why visual learners are not actually a separate category. Everyone is a visual learner by biology. Some people simply use imagery more consciously. The difference between someone with a good memory and someone who struggles is often just this. One automatically turns words into pictures, the other does not. Once you adopt this shift, your memory ability rises dramatically. Let's explore practical exercises to harness the effect. Exercise 1. Visual substitution. Choose a word you want to learn and substitute it with an image that resembles the sound or meaning. Example: gravity might be imagined as a giant grapefruit falling from the sky. Hold the image for 5 seconds. Say the word out loud. Repeat twice. Exercise 2. Emotional amplification. Take any boring concept and inject emotion into it. Example: velocity becomes a rocket screaming with excitement as it breaks the speed record. Emotion boosts neural encoding. Exercise 3. Spatial embedding. Place images inside physical locations in your home. The brain remembers spatial environments extremely well. Example: attach the image representing photosynthesis to your kitchen window. Exercise 4. Visual chunking. When learning long content, cluster ideas into small visual units. Example: 5 economic principles become 5 cartoon characters with exaggerated personalities. Exercise 5. The diagram reconstruction. After reading a chapter, close the book and draw the main idea as a diagram from memory. This strengthens both comprehension and recall. The pictorial superiority effect is not merely a trick. It is a doorway to a completely different relationship with learning. When you begin to think visually, information stops being a burden and becomes a story, a scene, a vivid experience. You no longer try to remember. The memory forms automatically. Visual encoding also helps reduce cognitive load. Words strain working memory, which can only hold around 7+2 items. Images create structural hooks that allow you to store far more information without overwhelm. This reduces mental fatigue, increases focus, and makes studying not only more efficient but genuinely enjoyable. The effect is so strong that even people with memory impairments, including early-stage dementia, can remember images better than text. That is the power you are tapping into. Your brain is built for imagery, and when you align your study methods with your biology, everything accelerates. If you've been struggling to remember English vocabulary, exam content, work material, presentations, or anything else, it is not because you lack ability. It is because you have been using the wrong input format. Words are weak. Images are strong. Words fade. Images remain. Words require effort. Images feel effortless. The moment you decide to convert text into pictures, you unlock the brain's natural engine for memory. And once this becomes a habit, your learning speed, confidence, and retention reach a level that feels almost unfair. This is the pictorial superiority effect. And from this moment, it belongs to you. Chapter 4. Image-based memory techniques. If the pictorial superiority effect explains why your brain remembers images better than words, this section explains how to use that power deliberately, systematically, and skillfully to transform the way you learn anything. Image-based memory techniques are not just tricks or shortcuts. They are cognitive amplification tools grounded in neuroscience, evolutionary psychology, and decades of research in human memory. When you learn to convert text, concepts, vocabulary, and abstract ideas into vivid visual representations, you unlock the raw processing power of your brain. Processing that is fast, parallel, emotional, and deeply rooted in your biology. What follows is a complete system that teaches you not only how to visualize, but how to visualize effectively, consistently, and in a way that supports long-term retention. The first technique is vivid visualization, which forms the foundation of everything else. Most people think they know how to visualize, but in truth, they do it weakly. They imagine vague, blurry representations that the brain ignores. Powerful visualization requires detail, color, size, texture, and emotion. For example, if you need to memorize the word erupt, don't imagine a simple volcano. Imagine a neon-purple volcano exploding chocolate lava into the sky while a terrified giraffe runs for its life. The absurdity activates the brain's novelty circuitry. The emotional energy activates the amygdala, and the sensory visuals activate the hippocampus. This triple activation cements memory. Neuroscientists describe this using the concept of multimodal encoding. The idea that the more senses and emotions involved in creating a memory, the stronger the storage. Every effective memory image should have at least one element of exaggeration, surprise, or emotion. Normal images are forgettable. Strange images are unforgettable. The second technique is exaggeration and distortion. Your brain does not care about realistic accuracy. It cares about what stands out. This is why you remember bizarre dreams, shocking headlines, or outrageous stories far more easily than everyday events. When learning, take the ordinary and make it extraordinary. If you need to remember fragile, imagine a giant glass elephant tiptoeing across a tightrope. If you need to remember rapid, picture a cheetah wearing roller skates made of fire. The more unrealistic the image, the more likely the brain branches new neural connections, because novelty signals importance. This is supported by research on dopamine and its role in memory. Novelty increases dopamine release, which strengthens long-term potentiation, the core mechanism of memory consolidation. The third technique is the emotion anchor method. Emotions are the glue of memory. You remember the happiest day of your life and the saddest day of your life with crystal clarity, but you cannot remember what you ate for lunch last Tuesday. When creating memory images, attach an emotion to the scene. Fear, humor, delight, disgust, wonder. For example, if you need to remember the term catastrophe, imagine a giant cat crying dramatically while knocking over skyscrapers. The emotional aspect, sadness mixed with humor, makes the memory stick. Studies from Harvard's Center for Brain Science show that emotional events activate both the amygdala and hippocampus simultaneously, leading to better encoding and retrieval. By attaching emotion to any image, you trick your brain into thinking the information is personally meaningful, which increases retention dramatically. The fourth technique is movement and dynamic imagery. The brain is far more sensitive to movement than still images because motion historically indicated danger or opportunity. If your visualization is static, it only partially activates the visual system. But if your image includes motion, spinning, crashing, dancing, exploding, flying, it engages additional neural pathways. For example, if you want to remember ascend, don't imagine a mountain. Imagine a mountain rapidly rising into the sky like an elevator, with you clinging to a tree branch as your hair blows wildly in the wind. Dynamic imagery feels alive, and the brain prefers what feels alive. The fifth technique is symbolic encoding, especially useful for abstract ideas. Abstract concepts like freedom, justice, economy, or momentum do not have physical form. To remember them, convert them into symbols. This is the same method used in math, science, mythology, and even religion. Symbols make the invisible visible. For example, to remember momentum, imagine a massive boulder rolling downhill faster and faster. To remember justice, imagine a golden scale tipping dramatically because someone placed a giant feather on one side. Symbolic imagery is powerful because once you create a symbol, you can reuse it across different contexts, building a growing visual vocabulary. The sixth technique is the linking method, which chains images together to represent complex ideas or sequences. This method is especially useful for remembering long lists, processes, events in history, or multi-step procedures. The rule is simple. Take each item and link it to the next using a vivid, bizarre scene. For example, to remember apple, book, candle, guitar, butterfly, you might imagine an apple opening like a treasure chest to reveal a glowing book, which then bursts into flame, turning into a candle, whose wax drips onto a guitar, making it play music, which releases butterflies that fill the sky. Each link is a mini-story that the brain follows effortlessly. The linking method works because humans decode information in narratives, not isolated fragments. Even infants understand stories before they understand words. The seventh technique is the story method, which builds on the linking method but constructs a full narrative with setting, characters, conflict, and resolution. Instead of remembering discrete items, you embed them in a story. If you need to remember 10 vocabulary words, create a short story that integrates each word into a scene. The narrative structure creates emotional momentum, making recall smoother. Neuroscience research shows that stories activate not only language centers but also sensory systems, motor cortex areas, and emotional circuits, creating a web of associations that drastically improve memory. The eighth technique is the number shape system, useful for remembering numbered lists. Each number is turned into a shape. 1 is a candle. 2 is a swan, 3 is a butterfly, 4 is a sailboat, 5 is a hook, and so forth. To remember a numbered list, pair each item with its corresponding shape. For example, if item 1 is research, imagine a candle melting over a pile of research papers. If item 2 is analysis, imagine a swan wearing glasses analyzing data on a laptop. Because the shapes are consistent across all lists, you develop a reusable visual framework. The 9th technique is the number rhyme system, another way to encode numerical sequences. 1 rhymes with sun, 2 with shoe, 3 with tree, 4 with door, and so on. For example, if item 3 is innovation, imagine a glowing light bulb hanging from a giant tree. If item 5 is teamwork, imagine 5 people climbing into one giant shoe, pushing it together. Rhyme adds verbal cues, imagery adds visual cues, and together they increase retrieval speed. The 10th technique is one of the most famous, the memory palace, also known as the method of loci. This technique leverages the brain's natural ability to remember places, one of its strongest evolutionary skills. Humans have extraordinary spatial